Zhao Shi's breath was cold and cold on her neck, the pearls hung down her trembling eyelashes, her small face was filled with black and her expression was weak, and her eye sockets contained imperceptible water, which dyed a pair of glazed eyes. Wet. She silently clenched her fingers, her expression was tense, and closed her eyes to avoid the breathless gaze that could force her. She still couldn't forget the poisoned wine he personally gave. That's how it hurts to the extreme. The tip of Mingzuo's nose was red, and the area around her eyes was also red. She sniffed, and her voice was weak, "I didn't hide." The candle was extinguished in the room, the light was dim, and only a few rays of moonlight remained through the window. Mingzuo could barely see his face, let alone his unfathomable expression, and only felt an invisible pressure. Zhao Shi took a little effort with his fingers, pinched her chin, and asked her to raise her face halfway, facing him. His voice was faint, "Did you hide?" The man's voice has always been kind, without any emotional ups and downs. Mingzuo was a little afraid of him. The calm surface was stormy. She couldn't tell Zhao Shi's happiness and anger. She turned her face away and said quietly, "Well, it's just a little uncomfortable." Zhao Shi's face was a little slow, loosened her chin, and moved gently and slowly to help her sort out the broken hair on both sides of her cheeks. He asked, "Where is it uncomfortable?" Mingzuo swallowed his throat and said, "Nonsense to deal with him, headache." Zhao Shi hummed softly, "Let the doctor come and have a look tomorrow." Mingzuo lowered her eyelashes, "No, just sleep." Zhao Shi did not speak, and the atmosphere remained cold. Mingzuo knew that it was useless to say what he said, and the decision made by what he said could not be rejected. After Mingzuo finished speaking, she regretted it. She didn't have a headache. The doctor came to the door to check her pulse. The lie she told tonight was about to be revealed. Zhao Shi's fingers on her waist slowly tightened, bent over and lowered her head, bit her soft earlobe with the tip of her teeth, and asked in a low voice, "Why didn't I wait for me to sleep tonight?" Mingzuo's body shrank and lied, "I'm sleepy." Zhao Shi gave an absent-minded hum, and his wet breath swept across her neck. His tone of voice became lower and lower, and in her ear, he said, "I will wear that fairy dress tomorrow." The man's bitter breath was quite strong, and he rushed towards her head-on. Mingzuo's pale and weak face showed a thin red, her voice was a little trembling, like a mosquito croak, "Yet." Zhao Shi stared at her face, his eyes getting darker and deeper. He slowly let go of her, stood in front of her, and coldly ordered in her ear, "Change my clothes for me." Mingzuo got up in a hurry, she was a little resisted, shaking her hands several times before she helped him untie his belt smoothly. The black belt is embroidered with dragon and tiger patterns, and the gold-woven lines feel cold to the touch. Zhao Shi observed meticulously, and the clues could not escape his eyes, let alone the obvious abnormality of Zhu tonight. She is not good at acting, and resistance is written on her weak and pale face. Zhao Shi silently stared at her for a long time. The girl's face was white and delicate, and her drooping eyelashes trembled gently. They were pitiful and weak, and they broke. The corners of Zhao Shi's mouth curled into a faint arc, and he stared at her face quietly for a long time. He likes this face. Although her body and mind are a little bit squeamish, she is always obedient. Every time she looks at him pitifully and innocently with these flushed eyes, it is not sympathy, but instead arouses what he hides. The despicable side. The girl is so soft and deceitful that she begged to act like a baby. Suddenly, Zhao Shi stroked her cheeks with chilly fingers, touched her brows and eyes with her fingertips, and finally stayed on her lips and teeth, rubbing her lips with a gentle or heavy intensity, "You are obedient." This cold and inaudible voice entangled her deeply. Mingzuo nodded with a shrinking head. Men speak with a cold air, cold and determined, strong without leaving room. Mingzuo's pale paper face gradually turned red, and before he refused to say it, he was blocked by his kiss. It happened to be the turn of Being and Forsythia tonight. Forsythia is younger than Being, and her face is somewhat thinner. Sister Being, I'll go to the hut. Being said, Go, there is me here. Sister has worked hard, I will go back as soon as I go. Forsythia counted the time before returning. She came back with a pinch, and couldn't help muttering, why haven't the lights turned off yet? His Royal Highness really didn't understand Liang Xiangziyu at all. Being glared at her, speak carefully. Forsythia immediately covered her mouth with her hands, and with her courage, she did not dare to say the words of the prince who arranged the prince. Although His Royal Highness has always been cold, but he is by no means a warm-sounding person, not ordinary harsh and cold. This night, until dawn, Wanjiao Pavilion called for water 5 or 6 times in total. Early in the morning, Being and others bent down and bowed their heads to clean up the room. The smell in the room was rich, and the curtains on the bed were slightly hanging down, blocking the scenery inside. Being didn't dare to raise her head from beginning to end. His Royal Highness was extremely taboo. Others stared at the girl Mingzhu, not to mention men. They were not good at serving maids next to them. The maid who had been serving the Pearl Girl since she was a child was dismissed by His Royal Highness, and she was far away. Being moved quickly to pick up the clothes on the ground. Before going out with her waist, His Royal Highness said in a cold voice, be lighter, don't wake her. Being, yes. At dawn the next day, Being saw that the prince came out of the room neatly dressed, with no extra expressions on his face. All the joys, sorrows, and joys were hidden, and others couldn't see through. His Royal Highness ate outside, and the waiters did not dare to breathe. Zhao Shi drank a bowl of porridge and asked before leaving, what has happened to you in the past few days? Being dared not hide it, shook her head, no. Zhao Ji pursed her lips and asked, how is she feeling? Being replied in a low voice, the girl seems to be in a bad mood recently. Zhao Shi couldn't help frowning, tapping his finger on the desktop, why? The slave and maid don't know. Being said carefully, the girl seems to be someone who wants a company. She dared not speak too clearly. Being didn't figure it out at first. The girl Mingzhu couldn't get out of the door, she couldn't see outsiders, and no one told her about the messy things that happened in the capital. How could she look unhappy? There is only one answer that she can think of, and that is that the Pearl Girl wants to have a child, whether it is companionship or consolidating her position, it is excellent. It's just that this wish of the Pearl Girl will eventually come to nothing. She is a maid who knows that no matter how spoiled, His Royal Highness will not let an outer room give birth to her own blood. When Zhao Shi came over last night, someone had already mentioned this matter to him. He took a sip of the cold tea, and then went to the court. Mingzhu woke up at noon again, drank her saliva and fell asleep again. She was so tossed that she got up from the bed just after noon and drank the Being's refuge soup as usual. Mingzhu put down the bowl, and realized that her voice became hoarse after speaking, he's gone. Being replied, His Royal Highness left early in the morning. Mingzhu was really afraid of him, can you leave any words? Being shook her head, no, just telling us not to wake you up. There is also watching her drinking medicine. Mingzhu lazily dealt with a word. Being brought a bowl of black medicine again, and she could smell a heavy bitterness far away, and Mingzhu knotted her brows, didn't she drink it? Although she doesn't mind drinking a few more bowls of refuge soup, wishing to be as infertile as she was in her previous life, drinking the medicine is really bitter. Being explained, this is a medicine to replenish the body. The doctor said before that you are weak and you need to replenish it more. Mingzhu is a premature baby with congenital deficiency. She didn't want to drink too much, and waved, you can let it go first. Being's face was about to cry, you can drink it now. Mingzhu glanced at her and sighed helplessly. These people listened too much to Zhao Shi's words and dared not defy a word. After drinking the medicine with a bitter face, she went to the yard to soak up the sun. She sat down lazily, squinted at the sun, and suddenly asked, Being, is Aru still working in the woodshed? Okay. Being didn't dare to answer, the prince had orders, and they were not allowed to say things that shouldn't be said. Mingzu sighed, "Forget it, I won't make it difficult for you." Last night, when Zhao Shi was in a better mood after the incident, she resisted the sleepiness, looked at him eagerly, and begged him in a low voice, asking him to put Aro back to her. Aro grew up with her since she was a child, and she couldn't bear to let Aro stay outside and suffer. Zhao Shi didn't say whether to answer or not, but faintly let her sleep. Mingzu made a great sacrifice for this, and took the initiative to hug his waist and beg him. However, Zhao Ji is hot outside and cold inside, and his heart is harder than a rock, and it is hard to move his whispering pleading. Being turned off the topic, "Do you want the girl to have tea?" Mingzu doesn't like tea. She thinks it tastes bitter. She said, "I want to eat sweet cakes." Being was a little embarrassed, then, "You can only eat 2 yuan. When Zhao Shi was away, Mingzu said badly about him, "He has to deal with everything, my father is not as wide as he can." Being was worried, "The slave and maid will go get the cakes." Zhao Shi went down to the court and was called over by his grandmother. After some greetings, he turned back to the subject, nothing more than he had reached the age when he should marry his concubine. The old lady showed him several portraits of women with both talents and beauty, and pointed to one of them, "This is the eldest daughter of the Ming family. If you like it, you can take her as a concubine." She added, "This is Princess Yang Yang. This child is strange and beautiful, not to mention his identity, and is worthy of the position of a concubine." Zhao Shi glanced at the portrait, and withdrew his gaze lightly, without any comment. "What you said is." She smiled, "You like it." Zhao Shi put down the teacup in his hand, "My grandson needs to be busy with political affairs today, so I will leave first and come to visit my grandmother another day." "Go ahead." Zhao Shi came out of the palace, asked the guards to turn the carriage away, and said, "Don't go to Wanjiao Pavilion, go back to the prince's mansion." "Yes." For half a month, His Royal Highness did not appear in Wanjiao Pavilion. Mingzu was so uncomfortable, she should eat and drink, her complexion was ruddy and she had gained 2 catties. Instead, the maid serving her was too anxious to eat, fearing that the girl would fall out of favor, and heard that the palace was choosing a concubine candidate for the prince, and she rushed. Being asked, "Girl, are you angering your highness?" Mingzu calmly said, "How dare I?" She wished that Zhao Shi would not come here again in this life, forget her, she would find a chance to run away. Being was full of sorrow, "Girl, listen to my advice, don't confront your highness will eat soft or hard." "I really don't." In order to be able to leave smoothly, she has endured the humiliation these days and dared not provoke Zhao Shi's unhappiness. A white light flashed in Being's mind, and she asked very carefully, "Could it be?" Mingzu asked, "What is it?" Being hesitated to say, "Could it be that you want your child to let your highness know, and deliberately hang you?" The light and shadow of the evening rushed over with the wind, and when the cold wind blew, the half-squinted eyes of the pearl sitting on the swing and basking in the sun slowly opened. She lowered her eyelids, her voice was gentle, "That's fine too." Being didn't hear clearly, she stood beside her and asked softly, "Girl, what did you say?" Mingzu shook her head, looked over the eaves and looked into the distance, her hand tightened on the swing rope, "Nothing." Mingzu doesn't want children in her life, although she doesn't know why Zhao Shi thinks so, but it doesn't matter. It would be a good thing for her if he wanted to dry her for a few days and sharpen her heart. This white wall and red tiles trapped her for half a lifetime. Mingzu's understanding of Zhao Shi is superficial, and she and Zhao Shi haven't said much in her previous life. This man is calm and introverted, restrained, cold-hearted, and will never allow himself to indulge in something or someone. It's almost inhumane and cruel. Maybe, as Being said, Zhao Shi also mistakenly thought that she was arrogant and wanted a child. In addition, he came to Wanjiao Pavilion for 2 consecutive days and wanted to chill her so that she could clear up her mind. Mingzu's mind doesn't need to be blown by the cold wind, but also very clear. The sun gradually set, and the eaves were covered with snow, and a few magpies that had not had time to go south stood on the eaves, twittering. After another 3 days, His Royal Highness still did not come to Wanjiao Pavilion. Counting days, they have not seen His Royal Highness for half a month. The maids in the outer courtyard talked privately, feeling that the girl Mingzu had fallen out of favor. Israel can't serve people for long. How about being beautiful? Do not go on the countertop. In the past, I felt that His Royal Highness only pet the girl, the love in his bones. Now I think about it carefully, I can't stand scrutiny. If I really like it, I won't even give up the status of a concubine and raise it in a remote courtyard. Thinking about it is nothing more than a vent/desire thing. Being watched the girl Mingzu still live in a chic and comfortable life, and her heart was anxious. Girl, otherwise you can be soft with your highness. This morning she also heard the rumors and rhetoric of those in the front yard, and she was furious. There was a charcoal fire in the room, and Mingzu had only a thin coat on her body. She sat at the window with a good contentedness, holding a book in her hand, and slowly turning the pages with her fingers. I don't want to eat tonight, just eat 2 sweet cakes. Enough to cushion your stomach. Being sighed sadly while playing the piano to the cow. She felt that the girl Mingzu had never suffered. This year, she was taken care of by the crown prince, Jinyu, and she was raised so well. She didn't know how sad her life would be after she fell out of favor. It was only half a month, and I heard the ridicule that I couldn't hear before. Girl, listen to my advice. Mingzu stretched out on the futon, sleepy. Being knew that she didn't want to listen, and knew that it would be useless to say more, so she sighed, the slave and maid will help you prepare cakes. Mingzu smiled at her, go ahead. Mingzu opened the wooden window, blew the cold wind, and squinted comfortably. In the days when Zhao Shi didn't come, he didn't need to be controlled by others, and he didn't need to look at his face carefully to protect himself, and he was as happy as a god. Being quickly brought the rice cakes made in the small kitchen, and also made a pot of rose tea, and the rich fragrance pours into the tip of her nose. Mingzu ate 2 cakes to fill her stomach and continued to read the script. After reading the folk tales, it was time to fall asleep. She took off her shoes and got into the bed. Before closing her eyes, she did not forget to let Being blow out the candles. There is no need to leave a lamp for Zhao Shi. If he deliberately neglected her, he would not come over recently. Mingzu curled up and slept in it, accompanied by the sandalwood in the incense burner, and it didn't take long for her to slowly fall into a dream. She had a dream. Mingzu's ears were cluttered with unintelligible words. There seemed to be a lot of people kneeling before her eyes. At a glance, she recognized the woman who was crawling on the ground and trembling. She was the mother who forcibly poured poison/alcohol into her mouth. The mother was shaking all over, with cold sweat on her forehead, her expression grim and pale, and regretful tears flowed down her wrinkled face. Mingzu feels strange and refreshed at the same time. It is really a dream, and the dream is full of pictures of her own revenge. The mother kept begging for mercy, her words slurred in fear. Mingzu walked a few steps forward and couldn't understand what she said. Gradually, she couldn't even see the picture before her. She seems to have changed a place, and the place where she enters the eye is full of white husks. Mingzu was scared to wake up from the dream by this terrifying picture. Her thin shirt was soaked in cold sweat. She sat up half holding the quilt, breathing heavily, and it took a while to relieve herself. Being heard the voice and quickly walked in. Seeing her pale face, she asked, "Girl, are you having a nightmare?" Mingzu shook her head and nodded, Being, I want to light up and sleep. Yes. Being lighted 2 red candles again before retreating from the room. Fortunately, I didn't dream again in the middle of the night after Mingzu, and slept soundly until dawn. I heard that the red plum blossoms in the back garden were blooming and I was going to see the plum blossoms. There was another heavy snow last night. The cold wind was fierce. Being persuaded her to stay in the room. Mingzu refused to listen. She put on her jacket and skirt. Find out the cloak in the box and tie it to her body. The pure color cloak and the hat are a circle of snow white. The fluffy fox fur, half of his face hidden in the furry collar, looks petite and cute. Mingzu stepped on a pair of small red boots on her feet and covered her warm bag with her hands. She was very excited when she opened the door. She asked Being, "Can plum blossoms be used to make pastries?" Being didn't know what to say. The girl Mingzu was so heartbroken. She was not sad at all, she only cared about what she was eating every day. The slave and maid don't know either. Although Mingzu hadn't had a good life in Ming's house before, her body was a bit squeamish. As soon as she went out, her delicate face was stung by the cold wind. Mingzu shrank her neck, taking every step of her steps on the snow with caution. In the back garden, the red plum blossoms in full bloom are so beautiful. Mingzu stood on tiptoes and leaned to the branch to smell it. When she laughed, there was a small dimple in the corner of her mouth. She said, "It smells good." Mingzu folded a branch of plum and discussed with Being, "Let's fold a few more branches, put them in the vase and put them beside the window pane, okay?" "Good." She wanted to say something, but she heard footsteps behind her, coming from far to near, stepping on the snow. The man walked up to her in no hurry, blocking her sight. Mingzu's heart trembled under the pressure of the familiar aura. He raised his head to look at him. The man wore a black embroidered satin gown with a white jade belt. He was slender and stood tall and straight in the breeze. The long black hair is tied in the jade crown, the appearance is correct, the features are exquisite, the slender eyelashes are covered with thin snow, the eyebrows are picturesque, the nasal bones are heroic, the red lips are bloody, and the whole person is cold and cold. Alienated. The man stretched out his thin and beautiful fingers, silently slowly tightened her cloak, and lightly patted the snowflakes on her body with his fingers, and asked faintly, "Like to come out and blow the air?" Mingzu replied in a low voice, "The plum blossoms are blooming. I had a dream last night, and I inevitably remembered how I died." I naturally hated the cruel man in front of him, but Mingzu still felt more fright than resentment. Zhao Shina is like a gentleman with a simple mind. He did things calmly, using invisible means of murder. When speaking to you in a flat tone, it is not necessarily not angry. Zhao Shi coldly glanced at the maid next to her, then stretched out her hand to clasp her fingers, and led her back, with a cold voice, "I want to see the plum blossom, let them fold it for you." Mingzu wanted to pull his hand out of his palm, but the man tightened it harder. Mingzu is a weak woman who can't resist his strength, "I want to come out and breathe." Zhao Ji responded indifferently, "Yet. In fact, I can't tell whether his tone is cold or not, because he always speaks like this, cold and indifferent, without ups and downs." Zhao Shi hadn't been here for more than 20 days, and it was not all to cold her, because of the Jiangnan snow disaster. He was so busy for days and nights that he didn't close his eyes, and he really couldn't take care of her. And Zhao Shi liked to suppress his emotions when he was a child, restraining the two characters from being carved into his bones. You must have a degree in everything you do. If you cross the line, it won't work. Mingzu was led back to Wanjiao Pavilion by him, looking at the figure of the man, her eyes were sore, and she was so liking him at that time, he actually killed her like that. Every time she thinks about it, she feels wronged. Since she was forcibly taken from the Ming family to break up her great marriage, why can't she be kind to her? Zhao Shi took off his cloak and told the maid, "Go and cook a bowl of soup for your girl." Menqi Being and others immediately went to the kitchen to make arrangements. Only the two of them were left in the room. Zhao Shi caught a glimpse of the textbook lying on the squishy low table. He picked up one and turned over 2 pages at random. Then he raised his eyebrows and asked her softly, "I have been watching these days. These scripts." He raised a smile of unknown meaning. Like a sneer, but also like a mockery. No wonder, when he didn't come, she seemed to live very comfortably, and there was nothing uncomfortable about her. Looking at her ruddy face, she was still fatter. Okay, really great. Mingzhu boldly took back the script from him. I use it to pass the time for fun. A canary who is locked up often feels lonely. Zhao Shi raised her as a pleasing plaything, and came over when he was free, and left it when he was free. Wouldn't she not allow her to have some fun for herself? Moreover, every time Zhao Shi came, it was to satisfy her own desires, and toss her in a variety of ways, unlike the dignified and thoughtful prince in the eyes of outsiders. Mingzhu finally saw him. She had to endure her upset and begged him in a low voice. She said, His Royal Highness, how did you think about the things I mentioned to you last time? Zhao Shi asked quietly, What's the matter? Mingzhu gritted her teeth, The maid I brought from Ming's house. Zhao Shi narrowed his eyes slightly, Do you want to get her back? Mingzhu nodded. Zhao Shi smiled softly, not reaching the bottom of his eyes, just staring at her in silence. The maid was loyal to Mingzhu, and had a history of taking her away. Zhao Shi had not killed the maid before, and was already soft-hearted. Seeing his face like frost, Mingzhu took a few steps forward, gently hugged his waist, opened her mouth, and begged softly, I grew up with her, and your Royal Highness will give her back to me. Zhao Shi hugged her, his breath was slightly cold, I think about it. Mingzhu smelled the familiar musky scent on the man, and said, I will thank your highness first. Zhao Shiman hummed carelessly, lowered his eyes to look at the girl's round and flushed cheeks, his eyes darkened, and his arms around her tightened secretly. He suddenly remembered something, and he asked, Mingru is your aunt? Mingzhu was stunned for a few seconds, It's my sister-in-law. The spoiled elder sister in the family is also a treasure in the palm of his father. She has been treated as an eyeball since she was a child, and her appearance is extremely famous in the capital. The sister-in-law is arrogant and a bit arrogant and domineering. Her arrogance is cute in the eyes of others, but she puts great pressure on Mingzhu, an unfavored concubine. The sister-in-law did not treat her well, and I don't know why she was not pleasing to her eyes. In winter, she was asked to help her wash her clothes. Before dawn, she was asked to call her up and go to the kitchen to make food. Mingzhu was frightened during that period. Every day, she looked forward to her sister-in-law being able to read more books with the princess in the palace, and less to come back to torture her. Zhao Shi only asked this sentence, and said nothing else. Mingzhu couldn't help being curious, His Royal Highness, why did you ask my sister? Did she come to find me? If this is the case, Mingzhu will never remember her previous grudges about her sister-in-law in the future. Mingzhu still didn't know that Mingru was the candidate for the concubine Zhao Shi's grandmother had selected for him. Zhao Shi met the eldest daughter of the Ming family a few days ago. Zhao Shi looked at these clean and transparent eyes, pursing the corners of his lips, and said nothing. Mingzhu was silly thinking that Zhao Shi mentioned her auntie because she was asked by her family to come to Wanjiao Pavilion to find her, and she naively began to dream that her aunt would bring her back to Ming's home. Zhao Shi looked down at her moist and clear eyes. The light from the panes reflected on her eyes. They were moist and clear, black and round, like a bright moon washed by water, so beautiful and clean that they couldn't move their eyes away. Zhao Shi swallowed silently, and curled up his thumb, resisting not covering her eyes. He said, Just ask, you don't have to think too much. Zhao Shi's words were like cold water on her head, extinguishing her newly ignited hope. Oh! Zhao Shi held her waist, and the end of her nose was filled with the unique fragrance of the girl's body. He hadn't gotten clothes for more than half a month, and it was unavoidable to be moved at this moment. He seldom restrained himself in front of Mingzhu, gently lifted her chin, and his dark pupils stared at the flushed flush on the girl's cheeks. The force on his fingers gradually deepened, forcing her to slightly open his lips and kiss her. Go down. Mingzhu staggered back 2 steps, her back against the table, unable to retreat. She was forced to lift her snow-white neck to cater to his kiss, and a few gossamer-like gasps leaked from her lips and teeth. Zhao Shi loosened her waist and tidied her slightly messy hair without hurriedly. The maids brought the freshly boiled soup into the room, all with their heads buried, and they did not dare to look randomly. Zhao Shi told them all to go out. The door was closed tightly, and the wind and snow outside was also shut outside. Drink the soup to get rid of the cold. Mingzu's face wrinkled into a small bun, and softly discussed with him, "Can I not drink it? I am not sick." She hates eating ginger, and the taste of soup used to make it taste spicy and unacceptable. After she said this, she raised her eyes and looked at him. The man's face was as usual, cold and white, sitting at the table, calmly, his faint eyes cast towards her, imposing a sense of oppression invisibly. "You just blew the wind, don't trample on your body." Mingzu didn't feel that her bones were so weak, not to mention that she didn't stand in the snow for long before she was caught by him. She didn't want to drink, so she lowered her head and did not speak, expressing her resistance in silence. Zhao Shi didn't seem to be annoyed. After a few seconds of silence, he picked up the soup in front of him and held the spoon. "Come here, I'll feed you." Mingzu's heart tightened when she saw him holding the bowl, and inexplicably coincided with the scene before her death in her previous life. In the previous life, he might as well give her medicine to force her to die, so that she would die more easily. She couldn't hold him back, she lowered her face and said muffledly, "I drink it myself." Zhao Shi raised his eyebrows, his expression became cold, and he didn't say anything else, and handed her the bowl in his hand. Mingzu frowned and drank a bowl of soup, then looked at Zhao Shi, but didn't know what to say. She squeezed the skirt tightly, her body tensed, and she could not sit still. Fortunately, Zhao Shi didn't stay here too much. He was not an idler. Even if he took the time to come to Wanjiao Pavilion, he still had to go to the study to deal with business matters. After Zhao Shi left, Mingzu let out a long sigh of relief. Being walked in lightly and asked, "Girl, are you and your highness reconciled?" Mingzu said vaguely, "I haven't quarreled." No matter what, Being was relieved, as long as her highness was willing to come over, the girl would not fall out of favor. Happy and a little melancholy, Being looked at her with a sympathetic gaze and couldn't help sighing in her heart. The news that the prince is going to marry the side concubine has spread, and she doesn't know where the pearl girl will go. Mingzu had just drank the soup, and there was still a lingering spiciness in her mouth. She drank 2 glasses of water to suppress the taste. Being suddenly said, "Girl, the servant girl will wait for you to change your dress." The pearl is unknown, so her round black eyes looked at her without blinking. "I look pretty now." Being smiled, "The prince wants to stay overnight tonight, did you forget the last fairy skirt?" After Mingzu reminded her, she really remembered. Apart from anything else, Zhao Shi liked her wearing that skirt very much. She thought about it and said, "No change, cold. The room has been burning carbon, and it's warm and not cold at all. This is just the reason Mingzu doesn't want to change clothes." Being was not wicked either, she just wanted to help the pearl girl keep her royal highness for a few more days. Mingzu knew that Zhao Shi would be staying here tonight, and sighed, with a faint sorrow haunting her eyebrows. While the maid was away, she took out all the jewelry that Zhao Shi had given her before and counted them: silver hairpins, gold ornaments, and many rare gadgets. Looking at the pile of golden treasures, what she thought was find a chance to change money. But going out is difficult for her to reach the sky. Since she was carried into Wanjiao Pavilion, she had never stepped out of the gate here again. It's not an exaggeration to say that it is under house arrest. Sometimes she doesn't understand how Zhao Shi takes care of her more severely than the prisoners. The plan for the present is to find an opportunity to get out, not to be kept here and wait to die. Being knocked on the door outside, "Girl." Mingzu had a guilty conscience and immediately hid the precious jewelry in the cabinet, adjusted her breathing, and said, "What's the matter?" Being said, "His Royal Highness asked Aru to be brought back." Mingzu was overjoyed and quickly opened the door to see the thin girl behind Being. Her eyes became sore all of a sudden. A Ro's eyes were red and choked. "Miss." Mingzu wiped the tears from her face. "Don't cry, I will definitely not let others bully you in the future." A Ro didn't feel wronged at all. Her life was given by the young lady, and she would not regret anything. Being only took A Ro to see her, and then led the people back, saying that A Ro could only come back to her and wait on her after she freshened and changed clothes. Mingzu was a little surprised. Zhao Shi was so easily persuaded by her this time and returned A Ro to her. She thought silently, maybe Zhao Shi still used to act like a baby. A Ro couldn't help asking Being on the road, "How is your Royal Highness treating my lady?" Being thought for a while, and said truthfully, "His Royal Highness has always treated girls very well." A Ro sniffed, and didn't believe what she said. If it was really good, how could she be willing to ruin it? Miss her family should have a good marriage and lead a stable and happy life. When A Ro was doing hard work in the firewood room, she heard that the young lady's ex-fiance was awarded a scholar, and now she is considered a dragon and phoenix. The young lady was supposed to be the wife of Jinshi, but now she is not as good as an outside room. And moreover, A Ro knew that His Royal Highness was just getting upset and judging people by appearance. He didn't have any sincerity towards the young lady. His Royal Highness Tongcheng Wangshiza mentioned the young lady. A Ro was hiding in the rockery in the backyard and overheard what they were saying. The prince didn't like her lady at all. I don't know when the misunderstanding occurred. She actually felt that her lady was no different from those scheming concubines who were climbing high branches and flying to the branches by tricks. Being found new clothes for A Ro, and said a few more words before handing it to her. "A Ro, you must know that His Royal Highness is our master. When the girl is punished, you will feel distressed too." A Ro took the clothes, yet Being felt that they had suffered from an attempted escape once, and they shouldn't do it again. Wanjiao Pavilion was very lively this day, and Ming Gru visited in the afternoon. She is the eldest daughter of the Ming family. She is distinguished, standing quietly at the door, and her aura is unusual. Today, Ming Gru wore a crimson jacket skirt, embroidered with roses on the skirt, and jade bracelets of excellent color on her snow-white wrists. She had light makeup on her face and a little rose red between her eyebrows. She said, "Excuse me, I'm here to see my sister." The guard at the door was going to deliver a message. The grandmother Lu, who was in charge, happened to pass by. Hearing that the eldest lady who had been well versed in her family came over, she was immediately invited in. Ming Gru thanked the grandmother and was taken to the backyard. Ming Gru hadn't seen this beautiful sister for a long time, and he really almost forgot about her. If it weren't for herself to be the prince's concubine, she would really not remember that this concubine was warming the prince's bed. Ming Gru met the prince at a palace banquet a few days ago. She felt that the prince had a good impression of her, and she also discussed a few poems with her, praising her for her talent and family education. Ming Gru knew that the prince was a very traditional man, and he liked women who were born innocent and knowledgeable. Ming Gru entered the master bedroom of Wanjiao Pavilion, saw the furnishings inside, and squeezed her fingers. The ground is covered with golden cushions, the corners are also covered with gold leaf, and the poetry, calligraphy, and painting hanging on the wall are rare orphans. This humble concubine flies better than she thought. Mingzu was taken aback. "Long eldest sister." Ming Gru didn't leak anything, and smiled at her. "Sister, long time no see." Mingzu thought to herself that she hadn't seen it in a long time. She is not a fool either. Her sister-in-law is coming fiercely, not like coming to tell her about sisterhood. Ming Gru sat down generously and drank a cup of tea. "I am here today to tell you something." "What's up?" "I am in love with His Royal Highness, and His Royal Highness also intends to marry me as a concubine." Mingzu only knew that the princess of Xiangyang in the previous life was the Prince Zhenfei, but she didn't know that Ming Gru would become his concubine. She bowed her head and said nothing. Ming Gru triumphantly said, the Ming family has a very strict family tradition. Mingzu wants to laugh a little. Is her strict family style just to give her away as a bed warmer? Minggu raised her eyes to look at her. I'm a elder sister to remind you that it is best to plan early and do it for yourself. Mingzu didn't want to be bullied by her in vain. She said coldly, see off the guests. Minggu stood up after drinking the tea and looked at her deeply. No matter how long it has been, she hated the beautiful and jealous face of her concubine. She used the words quite contemptuously, a plaything, I see how long you will be prestigious. Mingzu didn't take her words seriously, so let's ridicule the irony. What can someone who has died once can't ignore? Soon what happened in the afternoon reached the ears of His Royal Highness. Mingzu heard that Beiying said that Zhao Shi had a big temper after a long absence. After listening to the guard's report, the man was silent for a long time, and the atmosphere in the study dropped to freezing point. Suddenly, the man raised his palm and slapped it heavily, his voice low in rage, I didn't say that she was not allowed to see outsiders. The guard's mouth was bleeding, and half of his face was numb. The prince seemed weak, but his palm strength was not small, and he had a pair of broken palms. It was extremely painful to slap a person in the face. The study was not far from the master bedroom. When Zhao Shi returned, Mingzu was sitting under the window making lanterns, surrounded by several maidservants. He ordered everyone else to step back and looked at her face in silence. Her facial features are very beautiful, with red lips and white teeth, beautiful and delicate. Seeing him suddenly come over, Mingzu put down the things in her hand and slowly stood up. Her little head began to think wildly. Why did Zhao Shi come here? Still a little angry? Mingzu still had something to ask for, but he didn't say anything when he wasn't sure. His Royal Highness, do you want to use rice? You are hungry. A little bit. Tell them to prepare food. After eating dinner and rest for a while, I have to take a bath and change clothes. Mingzu endured her shyness and put on the fairy skirt he liked, and sat on the side of the bed shyly, waiting for the man who was bathing and changing clothes to come over. She slowly raised her eyelashes, her face was flushed by the candlelight, and her ears were hot and soft. She looked at the man shyly and took the initiative to hook his finger. She said, Your Majesty, I have something to tell you. Say. Zhao Shi's fingers were wrapped around her black hair, circle after circle, her voice flat and soft, yet. Mingzu boldly said, I want to go home and have a look. She wants to take this opportunity to jewelry for money. Zhao Shi's hand paused, and the fingers entwining her hair hooked carelessly, without hurting her. He asked, Who do you want to see? Her unforgettable former fiancé? Mingzu was stunned when she was asked. The hand she held on her waist increased her strength, and the man's clear voice fell on top of her head, Let's listen. Mingzu whispered softly, and she had no confidence when she lied, I miss my sister at home a little bit. Standing in the dark, Zhao Ji's face was like a transparent white jade. He whispered, Isn't your relationship with your sisters in your family bad? The voice was soft, and his expression was gentle when he spoke, but the words that came out of his mouth were somewhat sharp. Mingzu didn't expect him to say such a sentence, and the tone was the same as usual, but it may be that she was fragile and hypocritical, and she always felt a little bit of ridicule. What Zhao Shi said is not all facts. The sisters who were born out of her do not really wait to see her, but the relationship between her and her sister-in-law is not bad. She often gathers together to embroider purses. She sneaks out to meet Wei Chiu privately, and her two younger sisters will cover her up. Mingzu said with a cheeky, His Royal Highness may have some misunderstanding. I have a very good relationship with several sisters and sisters. Zhao Shi naturally didn't believe it. He had checked her situation at home earlier, but she had never heard of any sisters who were particularly close to her at home. Zhao Ji stayed silent for a long time. Mingzu was panicked and didn't want to miss a good time. She bit her lower lip. When she lied, Her ears and cheeks turned red. "Your Highness, give me a convenience, let me go back and have a look." Zhao Shi pursed the corners of her mouth, her expression calm, as if thinking about what she said, and as if not moved by her words. Mingzuo's slender arms took the initiative to wrap his arms around his neck, stood on tiptoes, and kissed the corner of his mouth. "I haven't been back in more than a year. I really feel homesick." Zhao Shi was silent for a while, then said slowly, "You don't want to be an inch." Today he has made an exception to send her unruly handmaid back. Mingzuo's face turned pale, knowing that Zhao Shi would not agree to himself so easily. She was not frightened by Zhao Shilan's indifferent voice. Zhao Shi is a soft-hearted person. She has a better attitude and can always give herself the opportunity to go out once or twice. In the previous life, Pearl was too obedient and cowardly. She didn't dare to resist him or get too close. She acted like a coquettish with him, and was obediently trapped in this small courtyard for 5 years. The tails of the pearls were red, and they looked so pitiful and soft and delicious at the same time. Their pitch-black eyes were as beautiful and clean as glass beads. Zhao Shi stood by the window, his face lined by the begonia flowers outside. The pane was delicate. He stared down at her, and sighed unbearably. His fingers loosened, and his fingers rubbed her eyes gently. "It's not early, take a bath and rest." Mingzuo squeezed her fingers tightly and mumbled. Hot water is already in the bathtub behind the screen, and a thick layer of petals is spread on the water. The water vapor creeps and the vision is blurred. Mingzuo leaned on the tub with her white body hidden under the water. After taking a shower, she did not get up and waited until she had to come out before slowly drying her body and putting on her dress. She walked out from behind the screen barefoot, white and red, as if she was wearing a light peach makeup. Long silky hair, like satin, spread out lazily on her back, making her face smaller and smaller. The man sits at the desk, the flame of a long candle illuminating his calm profile, holding a book in his hand, lowering his eyes, hearing the sound, slowly raising his eyelids, and looking at her for a few seconds. Afterwards, the Adam's apple slid up and down, put on the socks. Mingzuo's toes are round and really cute. She usually doesn't like to wear socks or shoes after taking a shower. She steps directly on the newly laid blanket with bare feet, not dirty or cold. The little girl's feet will be shy when someone looks at it, even if this person has skin close to her. Mingzuo curled up on her toes, climbed onto the bed, and hid in the bed. Zhao Shi stood up slowly, raised his hand to pick up the lampshade and put it on the candlestick. The flame of the long candle went out immediately. He slowly walked to the bed and sat down by the bed, holding a pair of clean socks in his hand. "Put your feet out." Mingzuo shook her head, "It's uncomfortable to sleep in socks." Zhao Shi bowed his head and was silent. Icy fingers went into the bed, held her ankle, and pulled her out, putting her little feet on her legs and putting on a pair of white socks. Mingzuo was dissatisfied and murmured, but she did not dare to kick off her socks in front of him blatantly. Zhao Shi stood up again, unhurriedly, unfastened his belt, took off his coat, and then blew out the 2 lights on the bedside. The man's fingertips have a slight callus, rubbed the back of her neck, and landed on her thin back, gently soothing her trembling body. "Don't shake, go to sleep." Mingzuo really couldn't cope with him, and the hour passed by the next day. After 3 poles of sun exposure, he woke up slowly. He was very hungry. After eating 2 bowls of porridge, he barely recovered his strength. The 2 weathers of Mingzuo are ruddy, and the eyebrows are soaked with the soft and hot spring mood. They are beautiful, but now they seem to be even more beautiful. You can't move your eyes away with a frown and a smile. Being told her that the prince had left Wanjiao Pavilion this morning, and after saying this, she said, "I don't know if the prince will come over the next few days. If His Royal Highness makes a marriage contract in the future, there will not be many days to come to Wanjiao Pavilion." Being couldn't help but looked at the girl Mingzuo and saw that her expression was normal, and she couldn't help but admire that she was really calm. On the other hand, it's a pity for her that the Mingzhu girl looks much more prettier than the Mingru girl, and her personality is much better than the Mingru girl. In addition to her humble background, she is better than Mingru girl in every aspect. However, His Royal Highness emphasized etiquette the most, and he was very particular about family status. At this point, the Pearl girl lost. Mingzhu had nothing to do, so she began to count her small treasury. She was ashamed that she had only 20 taels of silver, which was not enough for her to travel to Jiangnan. Mingzhu looked at the broken silver on the table and sighed. From the first time she took a row to escape and was captured, Zhao Shi never gave her any more money. The rewards are precious treasures that are not worthy of use on weekdays. A row made a pot of scented tea for her, and after serving it to the table, she stopped talking. Mingzhu was sitting in the sun and drinking scented tea. When she was so sleepy, she languidly took a nap against her pillow. A row looked at the girl's quiet face, and felt really uncomfortable in her heart. Although she has been doing hard work in the Chifang for most of the past half year, she has a good reputation and has inquired a lot of news. A row knows her own lady, is kind and soft, and treats her a little bit, and she can remember it for a lifetime. Previously, His Royal Highness was quite good to the young lady. Although the young lady did not admit it, Aru knew that the young lady was already tempted by the prince. People sent it over. It's a pity that I made the wrong payment. His Royal Highness only liked her appearance. Miss. Hey? What's the matter? Both long and short pains are painful. Aro was cruel and said, His Royal Highness wants to marry Miss Ru. Mingzhu smiled, I know. Yesterday Mingru had already personally visited her and told her about it. Aru said, Miss, you may beg the prince, let him let you go. Now that she is about to marry a wife and have children, and to raise an outside room, it will not be nice to spread it out. In the future, her young lady will find it difficult to deal with herself in the capital, so it is better to let her go. Mingzhu let out a low sigh, and said perfunctorily, Yet. I'll beg of him. She would not, she knew that Zhao Shi would not agree at all. Seeing her perfunctory, Aru mistakenly thought she was reluctant to leave the prince, so she was even more annoyed by the prince. Aro didn't dare to tell her the conversation she had heard in the rockery. She was afraid that the young lady would be sad. Anyone who heard her beloved man belittle her origin would not feel so good in her heart. What did Aru say in front of Mingzhu? Miss, the prince is not as good as Wei Gongzi at all. Wei Qi is from a poor family, but he does things well. Even if she is poor, she often buys expensive snacks for her young lady, and the money earned from copying books buys hairpins and bracelets for her young lady. After finally getting out of it, I used all my family as a betrothal gift. I was going to marry her family's lady as a righteous lady in 3 books and 6 ceremonies. Aro was vomiting blood after thinking about it. Mingzhu said with an expression, now it's useless to say this. Aru said, Prince Wei has been awarded a jinchi, if the young lady married him smoothly, she will be able to live a good life. Mingzhu raised her eyes and asked, has he passed the jinchi exam? Aro nodded. Very nice. Mingzhu is happy for him from the heart. Wei Chiu had treated her well before, but she had no fate with him. Mingzhu couldn't help asking a few more words, then he moved. Aro shook her head and replied, no, I still live in the back alley. When Mingzhu asked the answer, she began to feel lost. She lowered her face and said in a sad tone, I haven't had time to return the jade bracelet he gave me. It was the relic left to him by his mother, and it was sent to her as a bride price. A dozen boxes of betrothal gifts were returned to him by the Ming family intact when they retired. Only the jade bracelet that had been put on her hand had no chance to be returned. The day is dwindling, and there is a message in front that the prince is going to court. Mingzhu's heart jumped, wondering why he came again. She hurriedly closed her voice, unable and daring to name Wei Chai before Zhao Shi told her. Zhao Shi seemed to be in a good mood. When invited by a friend to go to the tea house this morning, he accidentally ran into the Ming family's eldest daughter, who was disguised as a man. The scholars in the tea house are aligning each other. Ming Gru unexpectedly got a few difficult pairs right in a row, and made a big splash. I was extremely surprised when I met him, bowed, and begged in a low voice, "His Royal Highness, please don't pierce me. If my father finds me sneaking out, he will definitely teach me severely." Zhao Ji promised that she would not speak out. Ming Gru laughed, "Then thank your highness first." Zhao Shi random hummed, and Ming Gru sat down beside him without authorization and ordered a cup of tea. Zhao Shi didn't drive her away, and sipped the tip of the hair in the cup. "You are right. Ming Gru is very humble, the prince is false praise." After it was over, Ming Gru took the lead. Zhao Zhiju, the eldest daughter of the Ming family, acted with a degree of stance. The size was just right, not too far away, nor rigid, and there was indeed a ladylike style of everyone. Cheng Wangshizi smiled and shook his head. "You, the future concubine, are a bit interesting, really a wonderful person." Zhao Shi put down his teacup and knocked it on the table. "Be careful in words and deeds." Cheng Wangshizi smiled again. "Could it be that you don't want to marry her?" Then he continued, "If you don't want to marry, no one will force you to marry. I really envy you. The marriage is in charge, unlike me. Whoever you want to marry, it doesn't matter if you say it yourself." Zhao Shi didn't seem to be listening attentively, and got up after sitting for a while. "I'm going now, you sit down slowly." On the way back to the house, after passing the pastry shop, Zhao Shi called the carriage to a halt and asked them to pack a few bags of sweet and fragrant desserts. He remembered that Mingzhu seemed to like these sweet and greasy pastries. After Zhao Shi returned to the other courtyard, he did not go to Mingzhu's room first, but went to the study to read and practice calligraphy. The cakes were sent to the Wanjiao pavilion by the guards. Mingzhu was flattered, but she would not be moved as easily as before. She put aside the packaged cakes and continued to play with the newly delivered flowers. After half an hour passed in a blink of an eye, Mingzhu stretched her waist. Yu Guang glanced at the tabletop inadvertently, and was silent for a few seconds. She said to the outsider Being, "Throw away the cakes on the table." Being walked in with a pale face, lowered her head and hid her face. Her calves were shaking, and her voice was trembling. "Girl." Mingzhu explained, "It's cold. I don't want to eat it. Lose it. Don't be afraid, he won't know." Being lifted her pale face, opened her mouth, her throat seemed to be stuffed with dirt, her lips moved, she was too nervous to say anything. Mingzhu is about to ask what's wrong? The cold, tall and thin man raised his feet and crossed the threshold, his expression naturally walked in. The room was extremely quiet and silent for a long time. Zhao Shi spoke with a calm voice, "What are you still doing in a daze? Didn't you hear what she said?" Being directly knelt down, shaking her body into chaff. Mingzhu frowned. It wasn't a big deal, but Zhao Shi seemed very angry. Mingzhu stood in place and sighed, looking at Being, who was kneeling on her head. To be fair, Zhao Shi's tone was not harsh, but she didn't know why she was so afraid of it. Although Mingzhu was also a little bit stunned, but only doing things that crossed the boundary. Zhao Ji usually speaks less and seldom gets angry. Except for the bedclothes, which is a bit difficult to cope with, he is usually a respectful and courteous son, who is polite and alienated. Mingzhu raised her head and said flatly, "Being, you go out first." Being stood up slowly, shaking her body, holding her breath. She didn't dare to breathe, and then slowly withdrew from the room after saluting. Mingzhu wears a pomegranate skirt today, which is quiet and soft. In recent days, she has been more relaxed, with more fleshy flesh on her face, and the corners of her eyes and eyebrows are less coquettish, and more lively and lovely. She looked at Zhao Shi with clean and transparent eyes, round eyes, pure and innocent expression. She asked directly and clearly, "His Royal Highness, are you angry?" The man wore very plain clothes today, with an ink-colored belt around his waist, and a half-cut jade hung on his waist, like a pine and cypress, upright and straight, without a trace of extra expression on his jade-white face. Zhao Shi only glanced at her without saying a word. Ming Zhu looked at the cakes on the table again and recognized that it seemed to be a dessert bought from her favorite pastry shop. His Royal Highness, the hibiscus cakes and sweet cakes are not tasty when they are cold. In fact, it was not too cold, she just didn't want to eat what he bought. Zhao Shi had already imposed enough things on her, she was hypocritical, so she shouldn't easily fulfill his wish on this trivial matter. Zhao Shimo squeezed his fingers in silence and looked at her blankly. He couldn't hear the emotions. He asked, "Why don't you eat when it's hot?" Ming Zhu lowered her face and said, "I was very supportive at that time." Zhao Shi still had a straight face, and the inaccessible flowers of Jialing could hurt people several feet away with the coldness all over his body. He said then called the maidservant in front of her, and said coldly, "Listen to her, lose it." The maid did not dare to refuse, so she hurriedly cleaned up, and the cat left with her waist down. This matter seems to have been revealed. Ming Zhu naively thought that his temper should disappear. In silence, Zhao Shi suddenly took out a jasper hairpin from his sleeve. "I got it a few days ago. See if you like it or not." The jasper can be seen by the naked eye with excellent color, no variegated color, pure watercolor, exquisite and beautiful, and it is a rare treasure at first glance. Zhao Shi has rewarded her with many such rare and beautiful jewelry, but that was all when he was in a good mood. Often the night before, she coaxed him to be happy and satisfied, or when she was down, she sent a few gadgets to coax her to be happy. In the past, when Ming Zhu received these gifts, she would still be happy, feeling that Zhao Shi still loved herself very much and was generous. But think about it, this little gadget is nothing to him, but it's used to tease things. If such a good hairpin is taken to a pawn shop, the shopkeeper may not dare to accept it. Ming Zhu didn't reach out to pick it up, but just asked, "His Royal Highness, are you in a good mood lately? I just heard A Rose say that he seems to be about to marry a side concubine. Is it because he is in a good mood because he is about to spend a candle night in the bridal chamber?" The more she thought about it, the more she felt. Zhao Shi was silent for a while, and raised his eyebrows. "It's okay." Ming Zhu suddenly knew that she was going to marry Mei Jiaoniang. She smiled and said, "This hairpin is too expensive for me. Things that can't be exchanged for money, no matter how good she is, she doesn't bother to ask for them." Zhao Shi's smile gradually faded away, with a faint chill in his eyebrows. He asked, "Who said you are not good enough?" Ming Zhu didn't know where he was offended by what she said. Doesn't he like to hear these 3 words? It's not that Ming Zhu doesn't know what he thinks. His self-sacrificing prince is prejudiced against her, and despise her everywhere. Zhao Ji kept the hairpin on her dressing table without saying a word, and then asked water to take a shower and freshen up. When the light was turned off at night, Ming Zhu was held in his arms, with water mist creeping in front of him, and the tails of his eyes were peachy and red, and the petite and slender fingers were clenched tightly against his chest, and said uneasily, "His Royal Highness, I'm a little tired." For a few days, the people who beat them with iron couldn't bear it. Zhao Shi gently stroked the back of her neck with a slightly cocooned thumb. The light was dim and his vision was unclear. His voice was gentle, "Don't move you, go to sleep." Ming Zhu breathed a sigh of relief, and Zhao Ji would do what he said. Since she promised not to move her, she would not regret it. She leaned on his long arms, her long black hair lazily spreading out like a waterfall. The people behind her hugged her waist, and the heat occasionally swept across her neck as she breathed. Ming Zhu leaned in his arms and fell asleep slowly, and woke up the next day, full of energy. She was sitting in front of the vanity mirror, only to find that there was a hairpin on the hair bun, and when she looked carefully, it was the hairpin she confiscated yesterday with a vivid and beautiful little fox engraved on it. Ming Zhu took the hairpin off, placed it on the table and stared at it for a while, then stuffed it into the drawer. As a prince, Zhao Shi gets busier and busier as he gets closer to the new year. After sunrise and night, I stayed in the other hospital for half a month. Since Mingzhu knew that Zhao Shi might marry Minggru as his concubine, she did not want to serve him in bed anymore. She is not jealous, just a little clean. Zhao Shi likes to kiss her very much, as if he loves her toy. Mingzhu was soaked with her dear eyelashes, and the soft neck was dotted with dots. After the man kissed her, he let go of her, took a shower and changed her clothes. After getting on the couch, she whispered, "I'm a little uncomfortable." She only dared to say that, and she didn't dare to ask him to spend the night somewhere else. Zhao Shi believed her at first, and was considerate of her weakness, and asked the imperial physician in the palace to treat her body. After taking the pulse, the imperial physician said, "The girl has a cold body and a deficiency of qi. It takes a few years to take care of it. It will be difficult for her to keep her baby even if she does not burn." Zhao Shi frowned and asked the emperor to go down and prescribe the medicine. After more than half a month, Mingzhu's raised face was round and red, both delicate and beautiful. It seems that the body is getting better. Zhao Shi has been standing still for more than half a month, sharing a bed with each other, almost never getting close, and seldom cuddling, kissing, rubbing. The weather is warming up gradually, and only a thin jacket is enough at noon. On this day, Zhao Shi spent a few more hours in Wanjiao Pavilion after finishing the things on hand. After Mingzhu finished grinding for him, she languidly lay down on the small table and took a nap. Her delicate and naive face was slightly reddened by the sun, and her simple and naive expression was a bit innocent and lovely. After Zhao Shi finished practicing, he looked up and saw her asleep. There was a few moments of silence, and the man hugged her to the bed sideways, covered the quilt, and then went out. Mingzhu slept until dark and had dinner before seeing Zhao Shi again. When she rested at night, the light was blurry and she couldn't see her sight clearly, and she had been courageously nurtured by a peaceful life these few days. Zhao Shi put her hand on his waist, her face flushed with shame, and her mouth was breathing heat. She said, "I'm sleepy." Zhao Shi stopped, "Go to sleep." In the next few days, Mingzhu couldn't find any other excuses, so she used the words lame physical discomfort to prevaricate him. Once or twice, Zhao Shi noticed her perfunctory, she was resisting him. Zhao Shi was considerate enough, and when he realized her intentions, he was a little irritated by the playfulness. It was night, he put on his clothes with a cold face, "I have something to do, so you can rest first." Mingzhu lay back on the bed and continued to sleep. Mingzhu dreamed of the dream she had a few days ago. The prince's mansion was covered with white buns and white lanterns, and the tip of her nose felt like burning paper money. She seemed like a wandering spirit wandering in this strange mansion, as if a gloomy cold air pierced her body. The servants carried the buckets of blood on the cleaning steps. Large patches of black and red blood were washed away, and buckets of blood were carried out. There was a quarrel not far away. Mingzhu followed the voice and heard the woman who couldn't see her face said, "Zhao Shi, what on earth are you going to do? She is dead. Can you think about it for me? My face has been standing for her for a long time." The monument disappeared when the tomb was set up. Mingzhu saw the familiar figure standing alone by the window, silent. The woman seemed to break down and smiled, "Since you like her so much, why didn't you marry her before you die? You don't know that she likes you and wants to marry you, kills people with your own hands, and regrets it again. Gone." The man turned around, did not look offended, and said calmly, "Come here, please ask the princess out." Mingzhu woke up from her dream listening to this indifferent voice. These dreams are really just dreams. Not only in her dreams, but during the first days of rebirth, Mingzhu would often think about what happened after her death. What would happen to Zhao Shi when she saw her body? Would you regret killing her? Will it also be a little bit sad? Will you shed a tear for her? It should not be. He estimated that he didn't even bother to look at her body, how could he regret it? Maybe because of this dream, Mingzhu felt depressed early in the morning and couldn't do anything. Mingzhu barely managed to beat her up. She thought she ran away Zhao's Heike last night, and he would not stay in another yard during this period of time. As a result, when she asked, he was still there. Zhao Shi seems to be living in another courtyard for a long time. Others secretly sighed that the girl Mingzhu is so blessed, and not everyone has one after another of graces. Unexpectedly, though His Royal Highness lived in another courtyard, he never set foot in Wanjiao Pavilion again, and never asked about the recent situation of the Mingzhu girl. Mingzhu knew that Zhao Shixin was arrogant, and she had rejected it so many times with false excuses. The anger in her heart would be hard to get rid of for a while. It would be better if he didn't come to see her because of this. The people were amazed by the fact that the Pearl girl was really tolerant, and she was still calm after being left out. If your highness doesn't come, she won't take the initiative to go there. The man in the Mochizuki pavilion had a good life, but the others didn't feel it well. Do things carefully every day, and don't dare to make any small mistakes, for fear of getting caught in the middle. 2 days before the new year, Mingzhu took the lotus soup made by Beiying and took the initiative to find Zhao Shi in the study. When Zhao Shi heard the report, the brush in his hand paused. Let her come in. He lowered his eyes and thought silently, although he came a little later, but he also knew that he didn't have no progress when he lowered his body and begged him. Mingzhu did ask him for something, but it was not what Zhao Shi thought. She calmly put the lotus seed soup in front of him. His Royal Highness, this is the soup from the small kitchen, you can try it. Zhao Shi didn't move, and listened respectfully to what she was going to say next. Mingzhu didn't circumvent his gaze, and said directly, it's coming to Xiaonian soon. I'll ask you for grace. I mentioned it to you last time. I want to go home. Zhao Shi chuckled slightly, just because of this. Mingzhu was stunned. Hey? What else can there be? Mingzhu carefully looked at the look on Zhao Shi's face with her eyes. She carefully used her words and said softly, Your Majesty, it's just a small matter, you should answer me. Zhao Shi was silent for a while, and the panes penetrated a few minutes of silver light, reflecting his cold eyebrows. Mingzhu has a cowardly temperament, and in front of him, most of them have a pitiful appearance. They seem to dare not even say anything to him. They only dared to nod and say hello to him if they are willing or unwilling. Shy and timid by nature. It's really rare that she speaks coquettishly to please her. But this matter touched his Ni Lin, and he didn't want to answer her for it. It is said that her life in Ming's house is far worse than that in Wanjiao Pavilion. What she said is difficult to convince him. What's more, Zhao Shi didn't know that the fiancé who had been engaged to her was still unhappy. If you really let her go back, the two will not be able to guarantee that they won't get in touch again. If the two meet, even if they just look at each other and say nothing, Zhao Shi would not be willing. He has an exclusive desire for Mingzhu that he doesn't have with others, and he doesn't like the eyes of outsiders looking at her. No. When Mingzhu heard these two words, the breath held in her chest suddenly vented. She endured the grievance, her eyes were flushed and flushed. Your Highness, I. The words just started. The man took a few steps forward, accompanied by a cool and cold soap scent. I said no. Mingzhu rarely speaks to him, and Zhao Shi rarely speaks to her. Most of the time, her days in Wanjiao Pavilion went smoothly and peacefully. Let him arrange it. Mingzhu was taken aback for a moment, and slowly recovered. To be honest, she didn't know why Zhao Shi didn't let her go back to Ming's house for a few days, just as she never understood that Zhao Shi didn't allow her to go out and show her face. Mingzhu wouldn't be defeated by these two sentences. She gritted her teeth and approached him, silently leaning on his arms, reaching out to embrace his waist, and whispering in a low voice, I haven't been out for a long time. Somewhat lonely. This sentence is not a play, but from the heart. It was fine for 10 days and half a month, but a year and a half was really suffocated and depressed. The canary raised in the cage should also be released, not to mention that she is a living person. Mingzhu got close to him, and the breath radiating from the man seemed to be cold, like white snow. Zhao Shi's body stiffened, and looked down at the person in his arms. Don't act like a baby. Mingzhu feels uncomfortable. If she can't get out, she won't be able to save money to find a way, and she won't be able to plan an escape route. She didn't want to die again, let alone die in Zhao Shi's hands. There is nothing in this world more heartbroken than being killed by someone you love. I was so sad that I remembered that it was a throbbing pain that lasted for a long time. Mingzhu hugged him, her hot cheeks pressed against the placket of his clothes, her eyes were red, sore, the cold and clear water drops slowly falling down the end of her eyes. She said in a dull voice with a slight crying voice, "Your Highness, let me go home once." She was born white, she looked very beautiful when she cried, her eyelashes were trembling, the tip of her nose was red, soft but pitiful. The tears from the end of her eyes, like melting ice and snow, were crystal clear, dripping on her cheeks. Zhao Shiking frowned, unable to speak sharp words for a while. The skirt of her clothes was half wet, and she touched her face with her fingers, and she felt moist water marks. The girl made no sound when she cried, and occasionally a few low sobbings came out of her throat, soft and waxy, making people feel pity. Zhao Shi wiped her face with her handkerchief. Don't cry. Zhao Shi rarely saw her cry. The last time she was taken to Wanjiao Pavilion by the Ming family on a sedan chair. The misty eyes looked at him pitifully, and said with tears that he was about to get married. Zhao Shi almost relented and put her back. After several struggles, his desire and ambition for her finally gained the upper hand. The little girl was crying and was sad, her eyes soaked in tears could hardly be opened, her soft white hands tightly clutching his sleeves. Zhao Shi's heart twitched, frowning without saying a word, the corners of his mouth slowly sank, and his mood fell suddenly. He gently lifted her wet and red face with his hands, sighed lowly, a compromise, and asked softly, "How long do you want to go back?" Mingzhu was stunned for a few seconds, her eyes were round, and she was silly and shocked again. She sucked on her red nose, her small face was soft, and her expression was slightly disturbed. 10 days. After saying the number, she slowly raised her eyes to look at him, her voice very careful, "Can you?" Zhao Shi held her wrist and looked serious when he was meditating, but it was not the usual cold and frosty, but some spring feeling of melting snow. 10 days were really too long, and the words of refusal came to her lips. When she looked down, the little girl looked at him with expectation and couldn't bear to refuse. After Mingzhu cried, her head was a little dizzy, and she felt a little sleepy, and she wanted to sleep. She said in a good voice, "The Chinese New Year will just happen in 10 days. I want to come back after the New Year's Eve." Zhao Shi stayed in the palace for the New Year every year, and would not have time to come to the other courtyard before the Lantern Festival. Looking at her red eyes, Zhao Shi couldn't bear it and felt compassionate. He said, "Bring being." Good. Mingzhu did not want to stay in the study when he achieved his wish. "Then Mingzhu will not bother your highness." Zhao Shijing glanced at her quietly, but didn't say much, and asked to send her back. The white fungus and lotus seed soup on the table was already a bit cold. Zhao Shi picked up the spoon and took a sip. The mouth was full of greasy sweetness. The maid waiting outside the study, waiting to bring tea and handing water, looked at the pearl that had left with a little admiration. In the past few days, anyone with a brain can feel that the prince is in a bad mood, and it has something to do with the pearl girl. The prince didn't eat lotus seeds, and he didn't touch any of them at the palace banquet. And he also heard that the pearl girl was not here to invite pets, but she had to come because she had something to ask for. How can the prince fail to see things that the maidservant can see through? So he originally thought that the girl Mingzhu had angered his royal highness, and she was asking for hardship. The result surprised him. It seems that the pearl girl is still favored, but the flower is not 100 days red, just don't know if the concubine and concubine will pass the door one by one. she will be prosperous. In the middle of the night, Mingzhu couldn't sleep, had already lain down and sat up again from the bed, checked her cage and ordered all the jewelry she wanted to exchange for money. Early tomorrow morning, she will be able to return to Ming's home. 10 days is enough for her to do a lot of things. Today, the tears that Mingzhu shed in front of Zhao Shi were half true and half false, and she was really sad when she cried. She herself didn't expect that Zhao Shi would let her go back. She didn't dare to cry before because she was afraid of annoying him. She never knew that crying was useful. Being waited until she couldn't hear the sound, entered the room lightly, and glanced on the bed. "Girl." Being whispered twice again, but there was no response. The girl should have fallen asleep. She blew out the 2 lamps beside the bed, got out of the room and immediately went to the study. Zhao Shi stood in front of the desk, tall and straight like a cypress, with his eyes down, quietly practicing calligraphy. The ink-colored handwriting on the paper is sharp and breathtaking. Being buried her head, the girl, these days, she ate well and slept well, but she didn't notice anything unusual. Although Being is Mingzhu's handmaid, she is also the person Zhao Xian puts in her side. She can be regarded as an eyeliner for the time being, and she must report her every move, even if she says something. Being also said, "The girl seems to like the jewelry you gave me very much. When I don't read books these days, I count hairpins." The man's face was hidden in the dim light, his expression unclear, yet. He put down the problem in his hands and said lightly, "Go back to Ming's house and take care of her." Being responded that the prince's unfamiliar aura made her dare not look up. "Go out." "Yes." Being only dared to take a big breath when she came out of the study. Mingzhu woke up without a dream all night, got up early to freshen up, and picked up a maple-colored water lotus dress with a waist, with delicate patterns embroidered on the placket. After putting on makeup, the color between the eyebrows and eyes can't be suppressed. Zhao Shiping usually doesn't allow her to wear such bright and colorful clothes. She is a little girl who always loves beauty. A few times I didn't hold back, and asked him why he didn't let her wear it out. Zhao Shi replied solemnly, "Indiscriminate decency." Mingzhu didn't feel out of decency, and Zhao Shi seemed to like her to dress like this. He never said that she was dressed up in her own room. Being came in and said, "Girl, the carriage is already waiting outside. Then let's go quickly and move my suitcase up." She couldn't wait. The little servants carried the cage to the back of the carriage. When Mingzhu approached the gate, she looked up at the sky. It seemed that she hadn't seen such bright sunlight in a long time. Mingzhu had gone away, not paying attention to the man who had already walked to her. Her shoulders suddenly sank, and there was a big red cloak. She was at a loss. Zhao Shi tidied the skirts for her, and the sunshine saw his exquisite and beautiful face, and his skin was as delicate as jade. He said calmly, "Don't mess around when you go back." Mingzhu lowered her head and nodded obediently. The little hand in the sleeve was silently clenched, and her heart was raised in the air, afraid that Zhao Shi would regret it and would not let her go back. She looked up again at the man in front of her. "It's getting late." Zhao Shi touched her face, and put a hand warmer in her hand. "Get in the car." Mingzhu felt a warmth at her fingertips that had been frozen cold. She was in a complicated mood and saluted him, and then climbed into the carriage. The censer was burned in the carriage in advance, which was also very warm. The carriage was swaying, and for some unknown reason, Pearl sitting in the carriage suddenly lifted the curtain and secretly glanced back. Zhao Shi stood in front of the door with his hands on his back, standing like a cedar in the wind and snow, standing tall but somewhat lonely. Mingzhu suddenly thought of her dream. She couldn't see his face clearly. She could only see a vague back. She tried hard to be straight, but she felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness, and even felt that he was a little pitiful. Mingzhu sighed and lowered the curtain. She had previously thought about whether it was the mother who was going to act on her behalf, bringing her poisoned wine privately, and forcing her to die. But it seemed that the glass of wine really meant what Zhao Shi meant. He didn't say he liked her. After drinking some wine at the banquet, he came back to hug her and kissed her and said that he liked her very much. Sure enough, what the man said when he was drunk couldn't believe it. In a blink of an eye, the carriage stopped at Ming's house. The people of the Ming family knew about this in advance, but only when 1 year passed, she was already fascinated and relaxed, and was disgusted and sent back by the prince, and did not take her seriously. Ming's family wanted face again, and her father felt that she was a bit embarrassing, and the servant at the door led her carriage to the back door. "Girl, the second master wants you to go through the back door." Mingzhu didn't feel much, became angry when she heard this. The young man who was greeted in front of the door was the most snobbish. Miss Six was not spoiled at home, dull and unflattering. She looked really beautiful, but the most beautiful people looked like that. It is estimated that the prince is also fed up with her boringness, and throws it back when he has enough play. He was very dog-hearted. "Miss Six, don't make it difficult for us. If you walk through the main entrance and come in, all the people in Beijing will know about this right away. The second master is also for your own good, not to let you lose this face." Being became furious when she heard this. This was the driving of His Royal Highness. Even if the Ming family didn't pay much attention to the Pearl Girl, they shouldn't be so deceiving. According to the explanation, Zhu has indeed been accustomed to a small temper this year, and she should not be affected by this kind of temper if she is a little arrogant. But after thinking about it for a moment, Mingzhu endured it. She said, "Let the groom drive around to the back door." It wasn't her face that was lost anyway. This slap hit Zhao Shi's face brightly. Being couldn't help but say something. "Girl." Mingzhu patted her hand. "Listen to me." Being couldn't help but suffocated her breath and ordered the coachman to turn around and go around the back door. Mingzhu also has selfish intentions. The back door is only 1 wall away from the Weifu. Since she was sent to Zhao Shi's courtyard, she has never seen her former fiancé again. The last time Mingzhu Tong Gui Chiu saw it was on the Lantern Festival. She sneaked out to spend the festival with him when her father and sister-in-law were in the palace for a banquet. Wei Chiu used the money he earned from writing articles for other students to buy her a particularly expensive hairpin. The material is not the best, but the stall owner's craftsmanship is exquisite and the carvings are vivid. Hosta, the asking price is 20 taels. She was too expensive and told him not to buy it. But Wei Chiu didn't listen to her, so he bought it. Mingzhu had to admit that when the hairpin was placed in her palm, her heart was indeed sweet. Later, Zhao Shi also bought her many hairpins, but none of them really liked them. Mingzhu got out of the carriage, turned around and glanced before entering the door. The white wall was blue with tiles, and the courtyard door was closed. The gatekeeper was a little impatient. "Miss Fifth, come in quickly." The maid at the house cleaned Miss Wu's room in advance, and the moxa was smoked up and down in the room, and a new quilt was changed. Being felt that they hadn't cleaned it up, so she fetched water and wiped again with a row. After cleaning the room, it was almost dark. The little servant in the front yard sent a message and asked Miss Wu to go to the front hall for dinner. Mingzhu changed her clothes and went to the front hall. It was lively, and the people in the big and second rooms had already arrived. Mingzhu's father only glanced at her, then looked away. "Sit down and eat." Mingzhu just took the seat. Mingru covered her mouth with her veil, and smiled lightly. "The fifth sister hasn't come back for so long, it looks like she's a lot stranger to us." Ming Yuan also laughed. "Fifth sisters are now very different in status from before, and it should be possible to be strange to us." Ming Yuan is the relative sister of Ming Gru's compatriot. Seeing her sister-in-law is about to marry into the Donggong Palace, she doesn't even look down on Mingzhu, the fox Miizi, and she speaks yin and yang strangely. Mingzhu is not going home to be angry. When she speaks coldly, she looks a bit like Zhao Shi in her aura. "Since Sister Yuan knows that I am not the same as before, she shouldn't talk to me like this." Ming Yuan laughed angrily. The spoiled daughter of Kyunjin couldn't bear the moment of anger, and she had to speak quickly. Do you really think you are such a terrible person now? Mingzu was not angry or annoyed. Sister Yuan said this, but I didn't say it myself. Ming Yuan still quarreled with her. The Uncle Ming family patted the table. Okay, eat. The people at the dinner table have their own thoughts. After quietly eating dinner, Ming Zhu was stopped by Ming Yuan on the way back. She didn't want to answer, but Ming Yuan took several maids to block her way. Pearl. What's the matter? Are you very proud? Jealousy made Minjai Yuan's face look mean a bit. She hated Mingzu's face since she was a child, and she was very eye-catching when she was thrown in the crowd, a beauty that no one could ignore. When she grows up, her face gradually opens, her facial features are delicate, her skin is fair, her chest is bulging, her waistline is also excellent, her eyes are innocent, delicate, and pure. Even if she doesn't have this face that can charm all living beings, her figure alone is enough for a man to fascinate her. Ming Yuan squeezed the veil in her hand, sneered and mocked. How many days can you be proud of? Isn't she driven back to Ming's house by the prince? Mingzu was speechless. How can you be sure that I was driven back? Ming Yuan smiled slightly. You don't think your affairs are well hidden, do you? There is anyone in the capital who doesn't know that you are an outer room raised by the prince? Mingzu was silent. Ming Yuan felt that she had the upper hand, and continued, you go to inquire about your current reputation, and listen to people outside. They say that the prostitutes are inferior, and they do all shameless things in order to fight for the branch. Mingzu twitched at the corner of her mouth. You are not noble. Ming Yuan said, they all said that you didn't hesitate to kick your fiancé in order to climb onto the prince's bed. It's a pity that young Master Wei paid in a foolish manner. Mingzu's face was expressionless, and her reaction was very flat. She was not at all as sad as Ming Yuan imagined. Ming Yuan hit the cotton like a punch, without any effect. Forget it. Ming Yuan looked at her and said, His Royal Highness has promised to marry Sister Ru a few days ago. The prince is a concubine. Your mother is a concubine for someone. I didn't expect that her daughter is not as good as a concubine, and she can't even be a concubine. Pearl, oh. She had heard about it a long time ago. Ming Yuan walked forward 2 steps slowly, and said in her ear, I know that His Royal Highness likes you and does not like my sister, but do you know why he wants to marry my sister instead of you? Mingzu clenched her fist silently. Ming Yuan said, because His Royal Highness is such a person who values his identity, he can marry anyone as long as he doesn't worry, as long as he is suitable. Anyone can, but Pearl can't. The prince manages everything every day and has no time to manage the backyard. The princess can be the head of Xiangyang County or Minggru, but it is absolutely impossible for the birth mother to be the pearl from the brothel of the brothel. Are you finished? Mingzu turned her eyes and looked at her calmly. I'm leaving. Ming Yuan was stunned, staying in place and watching her walk so far. She is not at all sad. Did not shed a single tear. Ming Yuan's chest rises and falls violently, and she is obviously very angry. The close-fitting maid asked in a low voice, Miss, will Miss Fifth sue the prince? I'm still afraid of her complaining. After all, the prince still likes Miss Fifth. Like it? Who doesn't know that Mingzu has to take medicine for contraception every time after serving? The news from the prince's courtyard is indeed difficult to inquire, but such trivial matters as decocting medicine can't be kept secret. The child is not allowed to be born, that is to say, she fancy her skin bag. Mingzu returned to the room, feeling more or less blocked in her heart. She knew that Zhao Shi looked down on her and didn't even think about it. She would still feel pain when someone stabbed the wound. Seeing that her complexion was not so good, Aro brought her a cup of warm tea. Miss, have some tea. Mingzu said, I want to drink sweet porridge. Ajudo, it's in the kitchen, I'll get it now. She urged, put more sugar. Aro answered yes. It didn't take long for the sweet porridge with longan to be delivered. Mingzu read eyes as she drank the porridge. She raised her eyes, sniffed, and asked, "Where is being going?" "Going to boil water." She put down the spoon. "Go and take out that baggage from my cage." Aruyan did so, weighing a little heavy in the baggage in his hand. Mingzu held her hand. "Tomorrow you will quietly take 2 things from your baggage and go to the pawn shop to exchange money." Aro seemed to guess what she wanted to do, but she was a little scared while expecting faintly. Last time she ran away and was caught back, the young lady suffered a lot. She knelt outside the door, and her heart was broken when she heard the cries and intermittent crying from the house. His Royal Highness's voice was cold and steady. "Do you have to force me to break your leg to be happy? Aro is really too scared." "Miss, you." Mingzu gave her a silent gesture. "Go down and rest." "Okay. Miss, I'll stay outside." Mingzu seemed to sleep better in her boudoir. Deeper and more revealing, it gets dark in the middle of the night. His Royal Highness located to Mingfu. The Uncle Ming family, who was ready to rest, put on his clothes again and went out to greet him. The prince was dressed in a woven gold and black dress, and said calmly, "Don't say anything." Uncle Mingjia couldn't understand the lord's thoughts. "Is your highness here to see Mingzu?" Zhao Shi glanced at him and said quietly, "Take me over." Uncle Mingjia can only nod his head and say okay. He couldn't look high at his niece who hadn't been taken seriously by him before. Zhao Shi quietly pushed open the door, and a faint scent came on him. The woman curled up in the corner of the bed, most of her face hidden in the quilt. His face was puffy, kind of cute. Zhao Shi looked very cute. He took off his shirt and reached out to put his arm around her waist after going to bed. Mingzu thought she was dreaming in a dazed manner, and went back to sleep with a second cry. It was not until dawn the next day that I opened my eyelids and realized that last night was not a dream. She was almost awakened by him. "His Royal Highness, why are you here?" Zhao Ji got up. "Change my clothes for me." Mingzu had to get up and dress him. The prince took advantage of her slender waist, lowered her head and grabbed her 2 lips, and kissed him twice. Soon. Where did Prince Mansion and Ming Mansion drop in? Zhao Shi had a rare and very free time today, and instead of leaving in a hurry, she started to look at her boudoir. The decoration is warm, and there are some little girl's favorite things everywhere. An exquisitely crafted box was placed next to the wooden window, which was deliberately locked. Zhao Shi's gaze fell on the brass lock, and he was a little interested. He walked over and saw the key next to the box again, ready to open it. Mingzu immediately ran forward and took the initiative to hold his hand, pretending to be annoyed. "His Royal Highness, how can you move my things at will?" Zhao Shi raised his eyebrows and put his fingers away. "Are you angry?" Mingzu's heart was about to jump out, and this box was full of dang letters written by her and Wei Chiu, the sour words written when she was sweet. Mingzu bowed her head silently, looking more like she was angry. The maid brought breakfast. Mingzu had something in her heart, and she had no appetite. Zhao Shi thought she was losing her temper. What happened in the morning was really that he was too rash, so he bowed his head and apologized. "It's me who is wrong, you eat well." Mingzu had no choice but to eat an extra bowl of porridge. After breakfast, Mingzu whispered that his behavior was like cheating. Zhao Shi pursed her lips, smiled briefly, and then coaxed her to sleep again. The box by the window was hidden by Mingzu, and then he dragged him to sleep for a while with peace of mind. Zhao Ji awakened earlier than her. Before leaving, he swept around the room. His eyes were very good. He found the box in the corner, but he never saw the key. He stared at the box in silence for a while, moving his fingertips slightly, and shook the rusted brass lock open with his internal force. Yellowed stationery covered the box. The name of Wei Chiu is written on the envelope. Mingzu woke up from her sleep and looked up and saw the figure sitting motionless by the window. He seemed to sit like this for a long time, with his back facing the sun, she could not see the expression on his face, nor could he see his emotions. The room was quiet and terrible, and 2 dim rays of sunlight saw behind him, adding a sense of depression. Mingzu wakes up and her head still hurts. She slowly sits up from the bed, her long black hair spreading lazily, her face is slightly pale, and she feels a little frightened inexplicably. She swallowed her throat tingling a bit when she spoke, "Your Highness, what's the matter with you?" Zhao Shi's fingers were on the edge of the table, and there seemed to be a few yellowed sheets of paper pressed under his fingers. His face looked very calm. "I saw something interesting." Mingzu sat up and put on her shoes, walked slowly to him, and saw the letter paper pressed under his fingers. Her pupils shrank suddenly, and she almost grabbed it back, her fingers clenched tightly. The heart sank gradually. Zhao Ji raised his eyes to look at Mingzu, and blankly squeezed the letter paper, handed it to her, and asked, "Is it literate?" Mingzu was silent. Zhao Ji said flatly, "Read it to me." Mingzu didn't even dare to reach out to pick up the letter paper he handed over. No one knew the content of these letters better than her. The young girl who was in love with her first love poems could soothe half of her teeth when she was mixing oil in her honey. She also knew that Zhao Shi was very disgusted with her contact with other men, and the eyes that this man sometimes placed on her made her breathless. It seems gentle, but in fact moisturizing and occupying all of her silently. To listen to him, it is best to follow his will in everything. Zhao Shi stood up, patted the letter paper on the table, and his voice was as heavy as a bolt of thunder. He squeezed her chin and tightened a bit, but he didn't hurt her. His pitch-black eyes fixedly looked at her. "Come on, read it to me." Quiet for a while. Outside the door, an attendant reminded in a low voice, "His Royal Highness, it's almost the time to go up." Zhao Shi said coldly and sternly, "Go away." The attendant standing outside the door was also taken aback, but he had never heard such a serious word from his gentlemanly prince. He courageously said again, "Your Highness, it will be too late if you don't leave." Zhao Shi's voice was a few degrees colder than before. The attendant shuddered and dared not say anything. Mingzu was so nervous that he didn't dare to move, his jaw hurt a bit, her eyes were slightly rippling, and her nose was red. She tightened her sleeves and took a breath. Then she closed her eyes and asked, "His Royal Highness really wants to listen to me?" Zhao Shi smiled coldly. Mingzu feels so wronged, he has taken care of her without authorization, and now has a temper at her. "Why?" She shuddered, "Please let go of me first, your lord, I will read it to you." Read word by word. Zhao Shi loosened her finger bones, Mingzu coughed twice, and picked up the letter on the desk. Some of them were written by her to Wei Chiu, and some were written by Wei Chiu. She didn't read many books, didn't know how to write poems, and wrote very popular and bold love words. At that time, there was nothing more than wishing to be sweet and sweet with him for a long time. At that time, she wanted to marry a good husband. She didn't have to have a good family background, and she didn't have to have a lot of money. As long as she was motivated, liked her, and was willing to treat her well, it was enough. So the letters are all true. Mingzu hadn't read these letters for a long time, and she was in a daze. After regaining her senses, she said in a low voice, "Wei Lang's prose, the affection is endless. I received the letter yesterday, full of joy. I haven't seen it for a day, like 3 autumns, I just hope to be able to stay together with Wei Lang as soon as possible and never separate." Every time she said a word, the expression on Zhao Shi's face became cold. Mingzu read these letters again, her eyes swelling, and her heart still feels a little uncomfortable. She went on to read the next one, "Wei Lang, I haven't seen you for half a month, don't come here unharmed. The mistress has promised to be my betrothed to you, I only look forward to the long flow of water with you." Zhao Shi pressed her wrist, as if finally unable to listen, "Don't read it." Mingzu felt that after she finished reading the letter, Zhao Shi's anger not only disappeared, but gradually grew. There is no extra expression on the man's face, his tall figure is shrouded in front of her, the pressure is low. Without a word, Zhao Shi picked up the old letters on the table and threw them into the brazier. The moment the paper hit the flame, it flew out. It's too late for Mingzhu to grab it. Zhao Shi saw her leaping forward, grabbed her arm fiercely, dragged her into his arms vigorously, looked down at her, and took a bite in the corner of her mouth. It was easier to feel the smell of blood after the skin was broken. His voice was extremely cold, reluctant. Mingzhu's face was flushed with anger, and there was a pitiful thin red at the end of her eyes, with some water faintly shining. Zhao Shi saw her crying without crying, and was so angry that he held back the pressure. At this moment, he also lost the calmness and reason that he was usually proud of. Do you still want to be the lady servant? Mingzhu clenched her teeth and did not speak, as if her eyes were glaring at him. Zhao Shi had never seen her look like a kitten exploded. When she mentioned Wei Chiu, she couldn't sit still, she had a temper tantrum, and his teeth tickled with hatred. Do you think he will marry you? Zhao Ji sneered at her mouth, as if she was mocking her for idiotic dreams. The indifference in Zhao Shi's eyes really hurts the self-esteem that Pearl is almost dying. This look is not so indifferent, but more like mockery, disdain, and despise, treating her as a lowly plaything and wantonly insulting. In fact, since she was taken captive by Zhao Ji to his bed, she had no self-esteem, so she tried to avoid thinking about the rumors in the mundane world. But her heart is not made of gold, and she still feels ashamed and sad. Pearl burst into tears. Zhao Shi didn't feel soft when he saw her crying this time, and said clearly, he won't. Don't think that you can return to him. Mingzhu wiped the corners of her eyes and spoke with a strong nasal voice. She lowered her head and said softly, if it weren't for you, I would have married him a long time ago. She doesn't have to be a shameful outside room for him, she doesn't need to be poked on the backbone and scolded by her sisters at home, she won't become a scheming concubine who seduces the prince in the eyes of others and clings to power. It was bright, and Being set up all the windows in the house to let fresh air into the house. Girl Mingzhu sat motionless on the edge of the bed, the tears on her face were still clearly visible, her eyes seemed to be looking at the charcoal brazier. Being cautiously walked over and asked, Girl, do you still feel cold? Why keep staring at the carbon fire? Mingzhu shook her head, I'm not cold. She raised her eyes and said, You help me get some water, I want to wash my face. His face seemed to be still wet, and it was really uncomfortable. Zhao Shi was mad at her this morning. After she said that, she didn't say a word and her face was frosty. She thought he would be furious, but she just left with a blank face. Mingzhu regretted that she shouldn't pluck her hair on the tiger's head, but fortunately, she was in Ming's house. If she was in the prince's court, she couldn't tell what was going on this morning. Being quickly took a basin of warm water into the house, and Mingzhu wiped her face with a wet kerchief, and then she felt more comfortable after putting it on her eyes for a while. She doesn't have much time, only these short 10 days. When it was time, I went back to the prince's courtyard. Mingzhu knew that there was almost no possibility of her escape without thinking about it. People in Ming Palace would not stare at her all the time, let alone where she went. Mingzhu deliberately broke Being away. She said, I want to eat Yangchun noodles. Go to the kitchen and stare at them and cook me a bowl of Yangchun noodles, no green onion or garlic. Yes. As soon as Being left, Mingzhu asked Ru to go out to the pawn shop. It didn't stop early in the morning. Mingru asked her close maid to bring a pile of dirty clothes, and asked her to wash the clothes as before. Mingzhu smiled angrily, is she a soft bun? Anyone can pinch. She said, tell the eldest sister, I will not wash. The maid seemed to have guessed that she would say this, so she brought Mingru's words as they were, Miss Mingru is also for your own good, so that you won't get used to having a good life, and you will fall into the bottom again in the future. Although His Royal Highness came quietly last night, he left with a cold face this morning. Miss Mingzhu must have offended His Royal Highness, her precarious favor, but now she is afraid that there is not much left. Mingzhu doesn't hurt or itchy, thank you eldest sister for your kindness, she should first think about how to deal with the future princess. Princess Xianjiang's innocent romance is on the surface, but in reality it is as cruel as Zhao Shi. Before the princess married into the East Palace, she could not tolerate her who could not enter the door, and she might not be able to accommodate Mingru in the future. And Mingzhu felt that Zhao Shi should be in love with Princess Xiang Yang, and only in order to let the princess marry him without complaint, she personally ordered the addition of her, a bed warmer. The maid was speechless, leaving her dirty clothes and leaving dingy. Being, who came back from the kitchen, was really angry when she saw the pile of clothes, they deceived people too much. What life did the Mingzhu girl have before? The persimmon is always soft and squeezed, and bullying is not painful for his father or mother. Mingzhu said, don't be angry, just lose her clothes. Being lost her clothes viciously, the prince is reluctant to ask you to do work, how dare they? When Mingzhu heard her mention Zhao Shi, the smile on the corner of her mouth slowly fell, and she couldn't make a smile. She lowered her head to eat the noodles, and just put away the chopsticks after eating. Aru came back from the outside, frowning, her eyes a little bit resentful. When Being is not there, Mingzhu has time to ask her what's wrong. Aru said, the jewelry was not considered. The shopkeeper said that I looked like a maid who stole out of a big family. Who knows if the precious jewelry in my hand was stolen, so he won't take it. Shopkeepers like human beings are more knowledgeable, and you can know who they are at a glance. Aru said, stomping her feet vigorously, I almost quarreled with him, I was really annoyed. Mingzhu told her to stay calm, but how could Aru not worry? She also wanted to take the lady out of the sea of suffering as soon as possible. Miss, what should I do now? Mingzhu frowned and thought about it, otherwise I will go there in person. Aero was a little worried, it won't be discovered by people, right? Mingzhu sighed in her heart, she didn't know what to do, but when she went out disguised as a man, she shouldn't be recognized so easily. So until the next day, Mingzhu found the men's clothing she used to wear from the cabinet and put it on, combed a man's hair bun, and looked from a distance to be a pretty weak scholar. Aero helped Mingzhu distract Being, and then the two of them slipped out while the little servants guarding the back door were gambling and fighting for money. All the jewelry that Mingzhu could sell for money were picked up and held tightly in his arms. When she walked to the door of the pawn shop, she looked around and hurried into the shop when there were few people. The shopkeeper knew that she was not an ordinary person by looking at her brows and temperament, so he quickly poured tea and water to pick up the guests. Girl, what are you going to be? Pearl. It was a failure of a woman to pretend to be a man. She moistened her throat, go in and say. The shopkeeper's eyes lit up, please. Mingzhu put the Zuchai jade bracelets wrapped in cloth on the table, look, how much are these worth? The shopkeeper's eye beads must be attached, and he carefully read the pile of things. After a long silence, he asked, girl, where did you get these things? You don't have to worry about it, it was not stolen or snatched. The shopkeeper stroked his beard with a very embarrassed expression. The pile of things in front of him are all treasures that are hard to find with a lantern. Many of them are treasures of the small country that are tribute, and can only be seen in the palace. The expression in his eyes when he looked at Mingzhu changed. This girl has exquisite features and extraordinary temperament. She looks like a spoiled young lady with delicate skin and tender flesh. Mingzhu was impatient and said, can't you make a price? I'm leaving if you don't make a price. Slowly. Girl, don't worry. I am leaving. 1,000 taels, I want them all. Mingzhu doesn't know the goods and knows it's not worth the money, she shook her head, no. The shopkeeper took a step back, how much do you want? The pearl lion opened his mouth and directly asked for 5,000 taels. She was ready to be rejected, but she didn't know that the shopkeeper had agreed to it in one fell swoop, and she was immediately ready to deliver the money to her. Mingzhu was in a trance and pinched the bank note. The shopkeeper looked at her with a smile. "Girl, next time I have something good to send to me." Mingzhu absent-mindedly replied with an and hid the banknote close to her body. Before leaving, she dissatisfied, "Call me son." "Yes, yes, let's go slowly." It is not easy for Mingzhu to come out. How many years has she not walked the street so freely? Can't remember. On a whim, she wanted to go to the rouge gouache shop before she walked to the main street. From a distance, she saw a guard guarding the shop. There was a figure she was familiar with inside. Zhao Shi was dressed in a blue shirt, gentle and elegant, and his face was as bright and clean as the moon. There was a woman beside him. He was dressed in red, bright and charming, with a lot of extravagance between his brows, which was extremely arrogant. When Zhao Shi turned his head to talk to her, her expression was gentler than Mingzhu had ever seen. Mingzhu's world seemed to quiet down suddenly, and their shadows were reflected in her eyes. The woman smiled brightly and cheerfully, and Mingzhu guessed that she should be Princess Yang Yang. Mingzhu knew that Zhao Shi was so gentle when getting along with his future wife.